Hey, folks. So I'm here with my good friend, Wenhong Yu. He's an attorney and a China expert. And as we're both in social distancing, self isolation, quarantine, I figured we would take this evening to talk about the situation geopolitically and everything that is going down. Uh, how are things going for you, Wenhong?
Good, good. As you know, as we've talked about before, I actually took my family down to my mom's house in Virginia to kind of get away from the tri-state area. I knew in early March that the New York metropolitan area was going to be a major epicenter for the COVID-19 outbreak. I didn't know at the time that it was going to be the epicenter, uh, the global epicenter of the outbreak. But I heard enough and I've seen enough, and you just take a look at the numbers, right? You just take a look at the exponential growth. Um, it was already a fact that there was community spread in the area, so I said, hey, I'm not going to take any chances. Uh, I think I'm going to go someplace that's a little bit more remote, where people are not as packed. So yeah, I've actually been here for a little over a month now. It's kind of crazy. Time flies.
I'm here in Brooklyn and I'm just staying indoors. I think I've been outside a total of 2 times since this started just to go to the grocery store.
That's good. That's good. That's good. I heard from my friend who lives in Manhattan. He said that like he saw people out and about. Like he saw plenty of people out and about again. He said he saw cars driving in the streets, and he said the most ridiculous things were that he saw people wearing masks, but like one of them had it beneath his nose, another one had it on top of his head, and then another dude, I kid you not, he said, I kid you not, he cut a hole out in the mask so he could smoke a cigarette while wearing the mask. And you just think to yourself, like, you know, that kind of defeats the whole purpose of wearing a mask.
Indeed. Indeed, it does. So, what do you make of Trump just doubling down on this narrative that somehow we should just blame the People's Republic of China for this? If you're angry about coronavirus, well, blame China. It's all China's fault, right?
I mean, it's not surprising at all. His MO, anytime he's faced with a challenge, is to deflect blame, right? And right now, the convenient scapegoat is China. And of course, I mean, I don't understand how people have such a short memory. 2 months, less than or a little more than 2 months ago, right? Like uh, end of January when the outbreak was just starting out in China and Wuhan. I mean, he praised, right? He praised President Xi for doing a great job over there. And then now I think he's doing this because the US looks so bad, right? We have more cases, more deaths than any other country in the world, and we're supposed to have the most advanced medical system in the world. But yet we're the hardest hit, and we had months of advanced knowledge. I mean, like the Chinese, yeah. I mean, you could argue that they could have done things a little bit better early on, but they were faced with a novel coronavirus. They didn't know what was happening, and it took a while just for them to figure out, hey, this is a new disease. Hey, oh, it is, transmissible from humans to humans. We had all that information. I mean, that was an established fact by late January when we had our first case here in the U.S. And during that time, I mean, what did we do? What did the federal government do? What is the federal government still doing? I mean, it's not really doing anything, right? It's the federal government is under the Trump administration. They've pretty much just um, you know just abdicated their authority and said, "Hey, states, you take care of this, right? We're not really going to do anything. We're not going to coordinate a response. I mean, you guys go fight it out amongst yourselves for PPE and whatever other, ventilators or other medical supplies. You guys figure it out. We're just, we're not in charge of doing this." So, for people who've seen what the last couple years have been, people who have seen his career over the years, I mean, it's not surprising at all that when things go bad, he tries to find someone to blame, right? And now it's just, okay, yeah, it's China. They were hiding their numbers. Okay, yeah, whatever.
Let me ask you, what were some of the strengths of China's medical system that enabled them to actually beat this? I understand most of China is back to life at this point, right?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that the straight. Well, first of all, I mean, we'll just start off by saying, China is still at best a middle income country, right? Its medical system is nowhere near advanced as ours or those of other, developed Western countries. But what they do have in abundance is the ability to coordinate resources, massive amounts of resources in a very short period of time. So basically, what happened once they knew that, hey, this is a novel virus. It is highly contagious, and it's pretty much exploded in Wuhan. So what did they do? In addition to extreme social distancing, right, which at the time the Western media labeled draconian, a violation of individual rights, blah blah blah. They also mobilized 40,000 doctors and nurses from around the country and sent them all to Wuhan, to Hubei province. They, built two 1,000 bed hospitals, specialty hospitals, right? With drones that would collect samples and deliver medicine in just 10 days. And they pretty much took 10% of the PPE and the ventilators from every other province and shipped it all to Wuhan, to Hubei, right? So their whole strategy was, we're going to keep it contained in this one province, so it won't spread to the rest of the country and disrupt the lives of other Chinese living in other parts of the country as much as possible. So I mean, that's the strength, right? It's the ability to mobilize quickly and to draw upon the resources of the rest of the country. And that's also a testament to listening to scientists, listening to the experts, right? I mean, you see these articles being posted these days all over the MSM, Business Insider, CNBC, CNN, say, China delayed social distancing or delayed telling people about the coronavirus for 6 key days, right? And I read it, I'm just thinking, okay, well, first of all, they keep citing to this Associated Press article, and if you read the actual article, it's actually it's not favorable towards China, but I would say it's a lot less biased than the other types, the reporting off of that report. It tells you, okay, so what was actually going on in those 6 days is they were furiously working behind the scenes to come up with a national strategy to contain this outbreak. And they cite this one doctor, this American doctor, who said, "Oh yeah, it was bad that they didn't tell people about it." But then the AP article actually cited a couple other doctors said, it's absolutely justifiable that they took this time, right, 6 days, less than a week, to come up with a plan and to really make sure that this is indeed a problem, that it's highly contagious, it's transmissible between human beings. Because if you come out and say that and you're not sure, it turns out that that's false, then it's pretty much like a cry wolf situation. And people are just going to be like, oh, this is, the government, they like to overreact with everything, right? And then the next time when a real outbreak hits, people are not going to take it seriously anymore. So I thought the actual AP article was much more balanced, but with the reporting off of that article is not. But if you kind of just take a step back, it's like, okay, so they took 6 days to figure out just exactly what was going on, to make sure that the science was correct. In retrospect, yeah, they probably, hindsight's 2020, right?
Sure.
In retrospect, they probably should have told people it was contagious, that human to human transmission is possible on the 14th, right? when they had that call that amongst the senior leadership, they probably should have told people. And they didn't. They waited 6 days until 20th. Okay, yeah, yeah, okay. They in retrospect, they probably should have told people right away. But let's compare with what has happened here in the UK and other Western countries where, you know, like I said, our first confirmed case was, I think, January 23rd or something around, along those lines. And what have we done in the intervening time, right? I mean, the numbers, it's exponential growth, but it has like a COVID-19 has a 14-day incubation period. So you can get lots and lots of people infected, but you won't know until about 2 weeks later. And then by that time, a whole heck of a lot more people have gotten infected. So, I mean, the science was it was pretty clear by that time, but we didn't take any action. We didn't take any action to stockpile PPE, to um, tell our domestic manufacturers to start producing more PPE. We didn't come up with comprehensive. We still haven't come up with a comprehensive national plan to contain the outbreak. So I mean, to me, like when you take a step back, it's kind of laughable, right? It's like, oh, the Chinese, they took 6 days to tell anyone. Well, I mean, Donald Trump was playing down, calling it a hoax, calling it a whatever, saying that it'll miraculously disappear by April. I mean, he was saying that for months, right, over here. And I mean, if you're gonna fault the Chinese for taking 6 days to make sure the science is right before they told everybody about it, then I mean, what are you supposed to say about, what happened here, what happened in the UK, where the government was floating the idea of herd immunity as late as early March, right? Before they were like, oh, actually, this is not going to work. And then the prime minister actually got it and was hospitalized for 3 days. So it's kind of, if you apply just a kind of a common sense lens to the whole situation, it's absolutely absurd. It's absolutely absurd.
Well, let me ask you, the New York Times, like last year, it attacked the Chinese healthcare system, and they made a video to accompany their article. And
Yeah, I remember that.
Nathan Rich, who's a journalist, a U.S.-born journalist based in China, just exposed that this New York Times report was full of distortions, like mistranslating people, misrepresenting what interviews were about. It was pretty nasty. But there are a lot of people who say, well, look, China, they don't even have a national healthcare system. China has just a totally private healthcare system. And what is the nature of the Chinese healthcare system? Like, how is it run? I mean, if the government is able to coordinate all the medical professionals and all of that, it's not private in the sense that we have private healthcare, is it? Like,
no. I mean, I don't know who's saying that the healthcare system is private in China. Like most industries in China, the healthcare industry is public. It's state owned. The hospitals, the clinics, they're pretty much all state owned. I mean, there are some private hospitals, but they occupy a very small portion of the sector, and the reason why is because they're very, very expensive. The China doesn't have a comprehensive national health insurance the way that Canada or Europe, Western Europe have, but the public hospitals, they are heavily, heavily subsidized by the government, so that when you go and seek treatment, it's very affordable. Obviously, if you have cancer, you have some chronic illness that requires expensive treatment for over long periods of time. I mean, you can get bankrupted, and people can get bankrupted because of health issues, and I think that's a problem with the system right now, and hopefully it can get addressed at some point in the near future. But for the most part, most of the doctors work for public hospitals and clinics, and that's how they were able to mobilize so many of them. It's at the end of the day, the entity that's paying you is the state, right? And it's like, well, you get paid whether you work here in this hospital in Shanghai or in the front lines combating the outbreak in Wuhan, right? You're getting paid by the same entity, so it's just a matter of a location. You can't really do that over here. It's like how would the payroll even work, right? You can't just take a doctor, from one hospital in another state and then send them over there unless it's voluntary and they want to do it. And I mean, they have to voluntarily kind of quit their job first at the first hospital and then take up a job at the second hospital where the outbreak is occurring. So yeah, a lot more steps in between steps in over here in the free market system that we have over here as opposed to over there in China, which is still, it's a mixed, right, command market or command economy mixed with a market economy,
Yeah.
and certainly heavy command elements in healthcare. So that's how they were able to get
Now,
40,000 doctors and nurses.
what do you make of we had voices in the United States like Glenn Beck, for example, the lieutenant governor of Texas, saying that we should just let older folks die in order to keep the economy going. I mean, what do you make of that? Were people saying those kind of things in China? I mean, I find it absurd and shocking that it would even be suggested.
No, absolutely nobody, absolutely, if any public official said that in China, if any media personality said that in China, I mean, they get sacked on the spot. There was, I think eh, there was the director of the health commission in, I think, Huanggang municipality in Hubei. I mean, they asked her some basic questions about how many beds the city's the healthcare system could how many beds it had, how many people it could take, how many doctors, and some just basic information that you think that the health bureau director would know, and she could not answer those questions. And the next day she was sacked. She was fired. You know,
Wow.
To have, I mean, I was shocked that the lieutenant governor of Texas. I mean, Glenn Beck, yeah, okay, whatever, right? Like, I'm kind of used to him saying crazy stuff, but to have an elected official, right, like the number two elected official in a state, and a large one at that, to just say, oh yeah, I mean, old people should just sacrifice themselves for the economy. I think that kind of tells you where our priorities lie, right?
Yeah.
For a lot of us in this country, not all of us, but certainly a good portion, and a good portion of the people in power. I mean, they want to it's more important for them to keep the gravy train going than to actually save lives, it seems like. And I mean, that's pretty sick if you think about it. And certainly not what happened in China, where, um, the government in late January decided, okay, you know what, we're pretty much just going to shut this country down for a couple months, right? We'll take that hit, and then hopefully we can control it, and then we can emerge, come back, and start reopening the economy up, little by little, gradually, as things get better and better, and that's exactly what happened. And it's, if you take a look at the data, right, it seems like, the powers that be here, especially in the Republican Party, they make this seem like, okay, you have to choose between the economy and saving lives, right? That seems to be the choice. And the lieutenant governor of Texas, it was on the side of, yeah, let's go with the economy. Let's not prioritize saving lives, especially for old people who are not doing anything anyway, right? That seems to be what their view is, and it's actually a false choice, because if you take a look at the data, right? If you take a look at what happened during the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic, and of course that's a misnomer as well, since it didn't actually start in Spain. Um, um, the cities that went on lockdown and was serious about it, they actually suffered less economically on the long term than those cities that didn't. The cities that didn't do a lockdown, or maybe did a lockdown and then um, and then opened things up before the outbreak was contained, and then a second wave hit and killed just as many people or more. I mean, the economic damage from overwhelmed um, medical systems, the economic damage from so many, dead Americans was far more devastating for those cities that didn't properly lock down compared to those cities that did. And I think that shows you that it really is a false dichotomy, right? Like if you are saving lives, you are actually doing the economy a service in the long run, right? Maybe you're going to take a hit this month, this quarter. Yeah, of course, right? I mean, China's first quarter GDP figures, I mean, they had a contraction the first time since 1976, right? Like, over 4 decades. But but I think they knew that, and they were willing to take that hit, knowing that that's better than if you just let the outbreak get out of control. I mean, the economic damage of that would be even more. So I mean that's my take on it.
Okay, well let me also mention now, we saw that there was a conference of an online conference of G20 countries where Mike Pompeo insisted that it be called the Wuhan flu or the China virus or the China flu, and just made a huge issue out of this. Now, Trump seems to have backed away from it, but Mike Pompeo is just adamant that we are going to blame China for this, that China owes us trillions of dollars because of this, and they are ready to run with this. What do you make of this? I mean, what is this about? What is motivating this? Number one, and I mean, does it appear that the administration is itself divided on this question? I mean, blame is one thing, but actually moving ahead, like people are wondering, for example, will Trump actually pause his trade war to get us the needed medical supplies? I know we have Operation Airbridge now in New York City, where Chinese medical supplies are being flown in, like thermometers and gloves and all of that. But there are a number of industries now that are making things like linens, like sheets that are needed, and other things that are necessary to fight the coronavirus that are still being hit by this tariff. So I mean, what's going on here? What is motivating this?
Uh, I can't say for sure. I think again, it's just trying to shift blame. And that's the MO of the Trump administration, right? I mean, like I said, we're the wealthiest and most advanced country in the world, and yet we have the worst outbreak in the world. Somebody must have screwed up along the line for that to happen, right? And it's pretty obvious to you and me and to a lot of Americans who that someone is. But the reaction in the White House in the executive branch is just okay. Let's deflect blame. Blame the Chinese, blame the WHO, blame whoever, and because we look bad, right? Like this wasn't supposed to happen here. So it did happen. It's a lot worse than people thought it was ever going to be. So yeah, we have to blame someone because it's not our fault, right? I mean, it's like hell would freeze over before Donald Trump takes responsibility for anything. So
Well, let me ask you also, China has done a lot to help other countries fight the pandemic. In terms of Italy, they've done a lot. In terms of Afghanistan and Iran, they seem to have
yeah,
stepped up.
absolutely, yeah,
Yeah, there's
absolutely.
talk of a health Silk Road. Do you know about
That's
this?
right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, China has stepped in um, because the U.S. has stepped out, right? This is an area where traditionally the United States has led the charge, has been a leader. Um, Certainly, it was that in previous administrations, right, under Barack Obama, George W. Bush. I mean, they anytime there was an outbreak of a deadly illness somewhere in the world, um, the U.S. was there, to help these countries out. For the first time since World War II, when the world was faced with a major healthcare crisis, the U.S. has been absent. So somebody has to step up. In this case, it was China, since China does, it has the most manufacturing capacity of any country in the world, and the world is desperately short of medical supplies. So it's supplying pretty much the entire world right now, and even that's not enough. The U.S. is stepping away from its traditional responsibilities as a global leader, and China has stepped in. Um, you know, um, I think it's trying to do the right thing in trying to help the world overcome this health crisis, this outbreak. But even then, they really can't catch a break, right? It's like um, every little thing that happens, it gets nitpicked on. So um, you know, they ship masks and PPE and test kits all over the world, and um, you know, the, there are parties here in the U.S. and other Western countries that are saying, "Oh yeah, this is mass diplomacy, right? They're trying to curry favors. There's some sinister plan behind all this for global dominance, whatever." And then anytime that something unfortunate happens, right? Like the test kits not working properly in the Czech Republic and Spain. It's like, oh, shoddy Chinese products. What do you expect, right? And then you dig a little deeper and you find, oh, well, first of all, the company that supplied these test kits um, is not actually licensed in China to supply test kits.
Mm.
And and whoever bought them in Spain, you either knew that and bought them anyway, in which case it's you assume you assume the risk of that, or you didn't do your due diligence and didn't find out that it was an unlicensed um, manufacturer of test kits, right? Um, and by the way, when I mean unlicensed, they're not licensed in China to sell test kits. They are licensed in Europe to
Mm.
sell test kits. They do have a CE mark. BioEasy, I think it's the company. They have a CE mark for their test kit. And then the second thing is those test kits are not rapid test kits. They're actually test kits that are used to confirm somebody has coronavirus once they're past the 14-day incubation period. So very different type of a test to begin with. And then there's defective masks or whatever in the Netherlands. Did a little digging into that. Well, apparently again, they're these masks that are certified, right, by the Chinese FDA, but they don't have a CE mark.
Mm.
They're not licensed, or they're not certified in Europe. Again, whoever bought them, I mean, I'm pretty sure you knew that when you bought them, right? That these masks don't have a CE mark. They are certified in China, not certified in Europe. But you went ahead and bought them anyway, and then you're like, oh, we're gonna recall them because they don't have a CE mark. And then, oh yeah, the Chinese you're selling us defective equipment, right? It's like, yeah, okay, this is pretty much a situation of bad faith, where you knew what you were getting and then created a whole ruckus afterwards. And what I was reading a post by a doctor in New York City, and he said, look, there's only so much manufacturing capacity um, for PPE in China, in the world, and demand has far outstripped supply right now. So all those factories that are certified, like the 3M factories and all the other, factories in China that churn out U.S. FDA and European CE mark certified products, they're all spoken for.
Mm.
You know, like the back order right now is months. You're not going to be able to get your hands on those.
Mm.
So guess what? Like you're going to have to buy, if you want any PPE at all, you're going to have to buy from some unlicensed Chinese manufacturers, right? I mean, and you're just going to have to take that risk, because the other the other alternative is, the CDC says, oh yeah, if you can't get your hands on masks, just wrap a scarf around your face. It's like, well, would you rather have a subpar mask, or would you rather wrap a scarf around your face? Because that's pretty much what we've come to, right?
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, like it's not an ideal situation, but again, it's this is something like China had no advance warning of this virus.
Yeah.
West did. All right, the West had months of advance warning to start prepping for this, but because of hubris, because of arrogance, because of complacency, whatever, we didn't think it would get here. We thought it would just be localized in Asia, like last time with SARS. So we didn't take any precaution. And then once it did come here, we were not ready, right? Like I don't see Asian countries. I don't see, Korea, or Japan, or Singapore making a fuss about, China fudging their numbers or whatever. They were the first countries, all those countries in East Asia, they were the first to report cases outside of China. Yet they have, far fewer cases than Western countries. Why? I mean, it's because they were prepared. They've been through this before, and they're prepared to to weather the storm. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like I said, China can't catch a break, in my opinion, right? Like it's trying to fill gaps in the global leadership, gaps that have been left by the U.S. by not stepping up when it used to, and just outright shirking its responsibility, like Trump cutting off funding to WHO. Well, guess what? Somebody's got to step up and do that. And I guess that somebody's going to have to be the number two power of the world, right? But it's a situation where it's like, well, we don't want to do this, right? We as the U.S., well, we don't want to do this anymore. But then when the Chinese step in, it's like, oh, but now they're trying to take over. It's like, come on, like you pick one or the other. Either we take the role that we have traditionally taken in the past, or we let somebody else do it, right? It's like um, either lead, follow, or get the hell out of the way. So pick one.
Well, it's interesting. Joe Biden, I read the article that he wrote for Foreign Affairs, kind of laying out his criticism of the Trump administration, why he should be president and not Donald Trump. This is the Council on Foreign Relations publication. And one of the things he said was that he didn't approve of China building coal power plants around the world. And he argued that China was significantly contributing to global warming with the Belt and Road by building power plants in developing countries. And I thought about that, and I thought, how many lives are saved by giving people in parts of Africa that have no electricity access to electricity? And I just thought that was such a cynical way of looking at things. Like we should keep countries without electricity, without modern industrialization, because, if China builds a coal power plant, that's bad on global warming. When actually China is leading the world in alternative energies like fusion research and such. And that seems to show that among both Democrats and Republicans, there is this unnecessary hostility. It's certainly from the Republican side that we're seeing it the most. I mean, I saw that Tucker Carlson's show tonight. It came up on YouTube. It was streaming. And the whole show was just accusing Democrats of being tied up to China, saying that they're tied in with China, and that's why the USA is not taking swift action against China, is because the Democrats are all being paid by China or tied in with them somehow. And it almost reminds you of McCarthyism, right? That after the Chinese Revolution in 1949, the Republicans started saying, who lost China? And said that the Chinese Revolution was all the fault of Harry Truman and the Democrats. And that became like a big rallying point. The other thing I've noticed is that it seems to me like China becomes communist when you're talking bad about them. But then when you talk about any economic success they have, it's because everyone knows they're capitalists, and they can't make up their mind. So right now that there's criticism of China, it's communist China, communist China, communist China nonstop. But when they're doing things really successfully, they never say that. I thought that was amusing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I did see a letter from the United Nations mission of China. It was a joint letter. It was signed by the Russian mission, the Cuban mission, the Venezuelan mission, the Iranian mission, calling on the United States to end its unilateral sanctions, because these unilateral sanctions, the Venezuelan mission signed it as well, Nicaraguan mission, these unilateral sanctions from the USA are hurting countries around the world in their efforts to fight against the pandemic. Can you talk about that? And that the Chinese leaders have been very vocal about that. That these sanctions the USA has imposed on China, on Russia, on Venezuela, Nicaragua, Iran, Cuba, it's basically killing people at this point, especially in Iran. I mean, Iran's ability to fight against this has been drastically reduced because of U.S. sanctions.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Chinese position is always, they oppose unilateral sanctions. They don't think that's the way diplomacy should be conducted. Um, and I think we've grown too fond of coercive methods to try to get people to do what we want them to do, right? Whether it's sanctions or military action. And, it's not really engendering goodwill in the world for the United States by doing that. And you wonder, how long can we afford to keep doing that? The more we sanction a country or multiple countries, the more those countries and other countries looking at them, the more it becomes imperative to them that they need to wean themselves off the US dollar. And there are alternative systems being set up right now to, that um, basically bypasses SWIFT. And I think there are plans in the works, right, in China and Russia and some of these other countries that are hit by sanctions, to gradually move away from the dollar. China and Russia, they're quietly building up their gold reserves, so it's not inconceivable that in the near future, in the next 10 or 20 years or so, we might see the de-dollarization of the global financial system. And if that happens, things are going to be very, very bad here because we, as an entire country, from the federal government on down, we don't know how to live within our means, right? And that's enabled by the dollar being a global reserve currency. We can print trillions and trillions of dollars and not experience any hyperinflation because we can export those dollars to other countries all around the world, right? Because other countries, they feel like, at least right now, that the dollar has intrinsic value. The way that, uh, a currency of another country, of a developing country, for example, would not, right? If a developing country is doing what we're doing and printing the amount of currency that we're printing out, I mean, they would experience hyperinflation overnight, right?
Yeah.
Your savings would be instantly worthless overnight. But we have the ability to do that and not experience that. But you know, it, everything is finite. You can only do something like that up to a point before the system breaks,
Yeah.
right? Over the entire 11-year bull market run from 2009 until 2020, February 2020, um, was in large part fueled by easy money, quantitative easing, right? Just the Fed printing out tons and tons of money and then artificially keeping interest rates low. I remember, was it 2018, right? The Fed raised interest rates 3 or 4 times, and the market threw a hissy fit, and then immediately they started cutting rates. So there was a lot of hot money in the market, in the economy, and the more, I mean, it's kind of crazy, right? Like we're running record deficits when the economy's booming and unemployment rates at 3.5%. This is, I mean, we tell individual Americans and households, like, when the going's good, you want to save for a rainy day, right? Um, well, that rainy day is here. We haven't saved money. We've kept on borrowing money in record amounts, and then now we're borrowing even more. So, I mean, this is. I mean, we might be able to do this in the short term, but it's definitely not sustainable in the long term. And I mean, it will get to a point, if we keep borrowing money, it's all going to come crashing down eventually, and that's going to be very, very bad because unlike a normal country, unlike any other country in the world, um, the only way we know how to live is to live beyond our means, as a people and as a government.
Yeah.
So when other countries no longer are willing to lend us money, what are we going to do then? right? What are we going to do? I mean, you either have drastic cuts in public sector services all across the board, or you print more money and experience hyperinflation. Neither of those prospects are very pleasing.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I mean, the low oil prices have got to be good for China on some level, right? I mean, with oil so low, China imports a huge amount of oil, and that's got
Sure,
to be good,
sure.
right? Not good for
Yeah.
Russia, not good for Venezuela or Iran, but it's good for China in a way, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think so, probably. I mean, lower inputs. So yeah, it's gotta be good for them. But you know, it's everything's all you always have to take, big picture perspective, right? Um, yeah, low oil prices are good, but oil is used for economic activity, and then and economic activity is at an all-time low right now. So
Right.
even with oil at low prices, yeah, you can buy it for very cheap, but then what are you going to do with it, right? Factories are not running at capacity anymore. You're not able to export your goods in the amounts, not near, nowhere near the amounts you were exporting them, a year ago or even 6 months ago. So, I mean, maybe the country can stockpile, oil in a strategic reserve, buy it up and store it, but it's there's not nearly as much demand for oil in China as there had been in the recent past. So
Yeah.
yeah,
One thing that I'm also curious about is, at this point, we're seeing that here in the USA, the economy is crashing and burning. But Amazon has made billions. Their stock is at record high because everyone's ordering from them. They're at home,
right,
they're hiring
right,
people like
right.
crazy. And it seems like coming out of this, there will be some people that are ahead, right? Coming
Yes,
out of this.
absolutely,
And
absolutely.
globally, is it possible that China is going to come out of this way ahead of the West? China's been growing and expanding and getting stronger, but then China beat this before anybody else, right? And is it possible that China will come out of this far stronger than even when we went into it?
I think it's too early to tell.
Okay.
Although I tend to agree with you. It's kind of, it's kind of a race, right? At this point, like, you know, who gets out of it the soonest, and China in this case is first in, first out,
Mm.
right? It was the first to get hit, but okay, it brought it under control pretty much in 2 months. Uh, I think we are here in the U.S. and in Europe, Western Europe. Um, I think we're going to have much tougher of a time because we took measures way too late. Um, if you take a look at when China decided to do a nationwide lockdown and how many reported cases they had, I think we're still in the three digits. They said, okay, with exponential growth, this will probably get into the tens, maybe even hundreds of thousands before it'll start coming down, right? And that's exactly what happened. But I mean, by the time we uh, started, locking down, it wasn't even a real lockdown. I mean, there's still states that don't have not implemented stay at home orders. Um, there were already thousands of cases nationwide, right? China really just only had one epicenter. It was in Wuhan. It was in Hubei province. I mean, we have, you know, we have multiple states with, five, six-digit confirmed cases. So, um, yeah, I think again, I think it's too early to tell, but I tend to agree with you that um, we're going to be shut down over here for a lot longer. Um, Europe is going to be shut down for a lot longer. And the economic damage that we will experience here and in other Western countries is going to be far more than what China will experience or has experienced.
And I guess speaking in kind of a long term, and I know you don't have a crystal ball, but I'm just asking in general, what does the rise of China and the continued rise of China mean for the world? How does the world change with China taking the lead?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a pretty complex question. Um, I definitely think you're going to see a more multipolar world.
Mhm.
You're definitely going to see a world where it's not just one country calling the shots, right? That country being the United States. And you're probably going to have, I think in the big picture, it's probably going to go back to maybe like the uh, 19th century post-Napoleonic War concert system, right? Where no major power was more powerful than all the other powers combined.
Mhm.
So there's going to have to be more of a balancing act between the major powers in the world, right? So, the US, Europe, Russia, China, India, and various other countries, to, people are going to have to talk things out instead of just one country getting its way all the time. I think those days are limited. I think, you know, with the way this country's going, with the way that Donald Trump is mismanaging um, pretty much everything. You know, it was easy to sort of hide his failings as a leader when things were good, but now that he has faced his first real crisis, I mean, it's very clear the emperor has no clothes, right? So if he gets another 4 years, that's only going to accelerate our decline as a country, and so that day when we are no longer able to do whatever we want across the world, I think that day may come sooner rather than later. And maybe I don't know, maybe that's a good thing, right? Like, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and I think we were at one time, American exceptionalism, that phrase, right? At one time, it had a positive connotation. It's okay, we are dedicated to freedom, to democracy, to knowledge and wisdom and science, and really pushing the frontier of what is possible for humanity. But in recent years, I've noticed that that term has sort of like a pejorative sense to it now, right? It has kind of a negative connotation, like, oh, American exceptionalism, like, it's more synonymous with arrogance and hubris and not wanting to play by the rules. And so I don't know, maybe it's a good thing that we're no longer empowered to do so, and kind of go back to what things were like before, where we have to sit down and talk things out with other countries and work with them instead of just, okay, we don't like what you're doing, so we're going to sanction you. We don't like what you're doing, so we're gonna, send some special operation forces, or send some, fighter, stealth bombers or whatever, and teach you a lesson. So I don't know. I think at the end of it, I think it's probably going to be, um, hopefully, a more equitable, more peaceful world. But during this transition period is what I'm afraid of, and I think there's going to be a lot of upheaval. There's going to be a series of crises. Hopefully, none of them lead to World War III, or else we're all dead. Uh,
Right.
but I think this transition period, where the U.S. goes from a global unipolar hegemon to not that anymore, is going to be a very risky time in the world.
Oh. Well, thank you very much for your time. I do appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
Yeah,
And
it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Caleb.
absolutely. Well, thank you.